off, let me ask you about the impact the pandemic has had on startups, startup workers, and founders around the world this year. You have a great vantage from which you see all of this action up close. Tell us more about what has been happening.
So it's had a fundamental impact. Now, some of the changes that have occurred, right? Some of those will be transitory in nature and perhaps more short-lived, but other changes, for example, distributed workforce, right? As we've found in our own organization, that working from home has been super effective, right? There's been no drop in productivity. And in fact, as we talk to some of our portfolio companies and other companies that we're looking to invest in, we find that productivity has actually, in certain cases, even been enhanced, right? So the notion of having a distributed workforce and that workforce being productive, which people always believe that it might be the case, but this pandemic has actually proven that it is the case, right? That there's no drop. And there's no constraint, that physical constraint of having to be in the office at all times was not necessarily a constraint. So it has had an impact. And in terms of businesses that were ahead of the curve in terms of adapting to new technologies, in terms of adapting to a virtual world, which everyone knew was coming, but what the pandemic has done is it's accelerated that, and what you'd expect to have happened over the next 4 or 5 years has been compressed and has actually occurred over the last 12, 14 months, right? So companies that were doing that already, were using technology, were using data science, machine learning, were able to run their operations virtually, have benefited tremendously, right? And if you take an example of certain sectors that have had great tailwinds from the pandemic, and we expect those to continue, e-commerce is a case in point, right? So e-commerce penetration, I think in the US was expected to be 25% at some point in 2024 or 25, but it's north of that already in the last quarter of 2020. So changes have happened. I think companies have responded well to them. I think founders have responded well to them. It's obviously had a very significant cost in terms of overall economic cost, social cost, and of course, medical cost. But for certain sectors, certain businesses, this has actually accelerated their transformation and their evolution.
Right. I want to talk about India. When the pandemic started last year, the consensus view was startups would be among the sectors that would be the worst hit. And indeed, many startups have really suffered. What we've seen, however, in the early months of this year has been a slightly different picture playing out. We've seen that, we've had weeks when a new company has turned a unicorn almost every day, right? In this year alone, so far, we've seen about 11